You are no longer yourself. You are a woman barely 20, pressed against the cold earth inside a yurt that reeks of damp horsehide and sour sweat. The ropes binding your wrists bite deep, each pulse of blood another reminder that you are a spoil of war, not a person. Outside, the night is alive, hoofbeats drum the frozen soil, steel clinks against steel, guttural laughter rises like smoke. Somewhere in the distance, a village burns. You don't know if it is yours, or another. But you can still hear the screams, cut short, swallowed by fire and blade. The tent is dim, a weak oil lamp flickering against stretched canvas, casting shadows that tremble like trapped souls. You are not alone. Other women crouch near you, their faces streaked with dirt and fear, their eyes darting in every direction as though searching for an escape that does not exist. Some are from your village, the curve of a cheek, the familiar line of a jaw twisted now with terror. Others are strangers, their accents foreign, their clothes torn silks from places you will never see. None of it matters. To the men outside, you are all the same. Chattel. Spoils. Currency in a conquest that knows no borders. The flap at the tent's entrance stirs. For a moment, the firelight catches the outline of a broad figure, shoulders squared, immovable as stone. You shrink back, your heart hammering against your ribs so loudly you are certain he can hear it. And then the flap is pulled aside. He steps in. The man does not need to speak for you to know who he is. Everyone knows. The conqueror whose name is a curse whispered from the Gobi Desert to the glittering cities of the Jin, Genghis Khan. His eyes are hard as flint, scanning the dim yurt with a presence that fills the space like a storm. He does not raise his voice, but his silence weighs heavier than any roar. You understand in that moment that you are not here by accident. You are here because he willed it. His cloak, trimmed with fur, shimmers faintly in the lamplight, and though his face is lined with age and weather, there is a hunger in his gaze. Not just desire, but something deeper, calculation, ambition. He gestures toward a guard, a hulking man with a scar carved from temple to chin. The guard obeys instantly, dragging one of the women to her feet. Her cry is muffled, swallowed by the noise outside. She is gone before the lamp flame steadies again. Your body betrays you, your throat locks, your limbs freeze, your scream dies unvoiced. This is not a moment of choice. This is conquest, distilled into flesh and fear. The Mongol camp outside is a cacophony, alive with victory. Fires crackle, horses snort, warriors drink fermented mare's milk, kumis, and laugh with the sharp edge of blood still wet on their hands. The air smells of smoke, sweat, and iron. Every sound is a reminder that the world you knew has ended. This is not a story of battles and cavalry alone, though history books love to recount them, the thunder of hooves that shattered empires, the sieges that reduced proud cities to ash. The Mongol Empire, forged by Genghis Khan between 1206 and 1227, stretched from the Sea of Japan to the Caspian. It was a juggernaut of blood and ambition. But beneath those tales of conquest lies a darker truth rarely spoken, the systematic use of women as tools of war, of politics, of legacy. The secret history of the Mongols, a rare 13th-century chronicle, glorifies his rise but remains nearly silent on the fates of women. Other sources, Persian accounts, Chinese records, offer fragments of the hidden story. They speak of captives taken from Tangut, Khwarazm, Jin, their names erased, their lives consumed by the empire's machinery. To understand their fate, to understand why the tent around you exists, we must go back, to the boy named Temüjin, and to the world that shaped him into the man who now stands in the flickering lamplight before you. Before he became the storm that swallowed kingdoms, he was a boy left in the wilderness. Temüjin, later known as Genghis Khan, was born in 1162 on the banks of the Onon River, a child of the Borjigin clan. His father, Yasugi, was a minor chieftain who dreamed of raising his family's fortunes. His mother, Holan, was herself a woman taken by force, abducted from the Merkit tribe, an early example of the brutal cycle of abduction and survival that would repeat across Temüjin's life. When Temüjin was 9, everything collapsed. His father was poisoned by enemies, and the clan that once followed them scattered, abandoning Holan and her children to the merciless steppe. Suddenly, The boy who would one day command millions was left to scavenge roots, fish through ice holes, and hunt marmots with crude traps. Hunger gnawed at their bellies, winter winds tore at their skin, and each dawn brought the question, would they survive another day? The steppe was a harsh school, and its lessons were merciless. Here, loyalty was fleeting. Strength was survival. A neighbor one week could become a raider the next. Temüjin's family lived in constant fear of rival clans who saw them as weak prey. His mother, Holun, fierce and unyielding, became his first teacher. She taught her children to endure, to bend but never break. It was said she could strip bark for food, trap wild birds, and coax fire from the coldest embers. That resilience seeped into Temüjin's bones. The boy's childhood was marked not only by hunger but by betrayal and violence. His half-brother Bektar once stole food meant for the starving family. Temüjin confronted him, and in a moment that would echo across his life, chose ruthlessness over mercy. Bektar was killed, his body left on the steppe. It was an unforgiving lesson. To command, one must eliminate threats, even those bound by blood. By adolescence, Temüjin had learned the cost of weakness. He was captured by the Teüjin, shackled with a wooden collar, and humiliated before their tribe. But even as a prisoner, he did not bow. One night, he slipped his bonds and fled into the grasslands, aided by a sympathetic herder. This escape, seared into memory, convinced him that fortune favored those who seized it with both hands. And then came the wound that cut deepest. In 1181, Temüjin's young wife, Borte, was kidnapped by the Merkit, the same tribe that had once stolen his mother. To Temüjin, it was not only a personal tragedy but a reenactment of the trauma that defined his family's past. He gathered allies, his blood brother Jamukha, his patron Togrul Khan, and together they stormed the Merkit camp, rescuing Borte. But when she returned, she was pregnant. The child, Joki, born in 1182, was accepted by Temüjin as his own, though whispers of doubt followed them both. This decision revealed something crucial about him. Control mattered more than pride. To reject Borte or Joki would have fractured his fragile alliances, invited rebellion, and weakened his authority. So he embraced them, turning a personal wound into a political calculation. Here, in the crucible of his youth, the seeds of Genghis Khan's empire were sown. Betrayal hardened him, hunger taught him discipline, captivity taught him cunning, and Borte's abduction taught him the value of loyalty bound by necessity rather than affection. To survive, he came to believe, was to control. And women, whether mother, wife, or captive, were woven into that survival. This was not unique to the Mongols. Across the world, societies treated women as tools of alliance. In Europe, noble daughters were married off to seal treaties. In China, imperial concubines bound rival clans to the dynasty. But on the steppe, where power shifted with the wind, such bonds were fragile and often taken by force. For Temüjin, these lessons fused into an unshakable creed: dominance was security, and mercy was a weakness few could afford. By the dawn of the 13th century, Temüjin's ambition was no longer the dream of a hungry boy. He was gathering tribes, forging friendships, and crushing rivals. The boy abandoned to die on the steppe was transforming into a leader who believed he was destined to rule it. And in 1206, that belief would be sealed when he claimed the title that would echo for centuries: Genghis Khan, universal ruler. By the turn of the 13th century, the boy who had once scavenged roots along the Onon River was now a man feared across the steppes. Temüjin's rise was not a sudden eruption but a steady, brutal climb, built on loyalty, betrayal, and blood. He had learned to gather followers not by birthright but by merit. Where other chiefs hoarded power among their kin, Temüjin rewarded skill and loyalty. A herdsman who could fight bravely might rise above a noble-born weakling. To the fractured tribes of Mongolia, this was radical and irresistible. But the path to supremacy was paved with corpses. Temüjin betrayed Jamukha, the sworn brother who once shared his blanket, after their alliance soured into rivalry. In the Battle of Dalan Bal's Hut, Jamukha's forces captured 70 young men loyal to Temüjin. They were executed by being boiled alive, an atrocity Temüjin never forgot. Years later, when Jamukha himself was captured, Temüjin would kill him not with cruelty but with an honorable death, bloodless, a final gesture that was both mercy and vengeance. Family too fell to his ambition. His half-brother Bektar, slain in childhood, was only the beginning. In Temüjin's worldview, blood ties mattered less than survival. Each betrayal, each calculated death, drew him closer to an unshakable truth: unity could only be forged through fear and absolute authority. By 1201, the great tribes of the steppe, the Temüjin, the Nayman, the Merkits, had all felt the edge of Temüjin's blade. He defeated them in turn, folding survivors into his growing force. In 1206, on the banks of the Onan River, the Kurultai, the great tribal assembly, proclaimed him Genghis Khan, or Genghis Khan, universal ruler. The empire that took shape was more than a horde of horsemen. It was a system. Soldiers were organized into tens, hundreds, and thousands, bound by strict discipline. Loot was divided with precision to prevent quarrels. Spies and messengers crisscrossed the plains, feeding the Khan information that made him always seem one step ahead. His warriors, armed with composite bows and mounted on hardy steppe ponies, could ride for days without fire, living on dried meat and horse blood drawn from a vein. Against such a machine, sedentary kingdoms faltered. Yet even as the chronicles celebrate the brilliance of his armies, they whisper little of the quieter empire rising behind the battle lines. In his Ordo, the great camp, another system was being built, one woven not from iron or sinew but from women. Marriage and concubinage became weapons as sharp as sabers. Genghis married Borte not only for love, but for alliance with her powerful Ongjurat clan. After victories, daughters of defeated rulers were taken into his household, sometimes offered willingly as tribute to spare their people, more often dragged from burning palaces as living trophies. These women were more than ornaments, they were bonds of blood, their children threads that tied conquered clans to the Mongol court. For principal wives, Borte, Kulan, Yesue, and Yasujin, ruled their own households, managing trade, herds, and disputes while Genghis waged war. Each commanded an ordo, a moving court that shadowed the Khan across the steppes. Beyond them stretched a harem so vast that even contemporary chroniclers struggled to number it. Persian historian Juvayni hinted at hundreds of women, perhaps 500 or more, though only 44 were officially recorded. The ordo was not merely domestic space, it was political machinery. Captive women became concubines, concubines became wives, wives became power brokers. Some wielded influence quietly, whispering counsel into the Khan's ear. Others ruled openly, commanding respect from generals and princes alike. And yet, at the base of the hierarchy, countless others were slaves, their bodies used, their names erased, their fates forgotten. Imagine the scene: night falls over the Mongol encampment. Beyond the ring of yurts, warriors sharpen blades by firelight, their laughter coarse, their kumis flowing. Inside the Khan's tent, maps are unrolled, lines traced across lands soon to be conquered. And beside him, a woman, sometimes Borte, his lifelong companion, sometimes a new concubine from a fallen city. She is both prisoner and instrument. Her presence a reminder that conquest was not only about territory but about the weaving of human lives into the fabric of empire. Other civilizations had practiced similar strategies. Rome married daughters of rivals into its elite. China's emperors filled their palaces with concubines from allied clans. But on the steppe, the practice was raw, immediate, and often violent. To take a woman was to take her lineage, to stamp one's claim not only upon land but upon blood itself. Thus, the empire that thundered from the hooves of Mongol horses was mirrored by another empire, quieter, hidden, but no less ruthless, an empire of women bound to the Khan. And as Genghis turned his gaze outward, toward the Jin dynasty, the Tangut kingdom, and the Khwarezmian empire, this hidden machinery grew ever more vital. The chronicles often tell us of fire and steel, of arrows blotting out the sun and cities reduced to rubble. But behind those scenes of conquest lay another form of domination, one quieter yet no less devastating: the control of women. For Genghis Khan, women were not merely companions, they were instruments of power, tools to bind tribes, to humiliate enemies, and to cement his legacy. The system was precise, almost clinical. Captive women were divided into 3 categories. At the top stood the principal wives, women of stature like Borte, his first and most trusted partner, and others such as Kalan, Yesue, and Yasujin. Each commanded an ordo, a mobile household that was both domestic and political in nature. These wives oversaw herds, supervised servants, and even mediated disputes in Genghis's absence. Their words carried weight, and their counsel could shape the Khan's decisions in matters of war and alliance. Below them stood the concubines, often high-born captives taken from conquered kingdoms. The daughters of Tangut kings, the sisters of Jin emperors, noblewomen from Horazm, all found themselves woven into the Khan's expanding household. They lived in relative comfort compared to slaves, yet their fates were no less confined. Their status depended entirely on the Khan's favor. A woman might rise to influence if she bore a son, but she could just as easily be forgotten, reduced to a shadow in the Khan's immense harem. And then, at the bottom, were the slaves. Women pulled from smoking villages, stripped of their names, given to warriors as rewards. Persian chronicler Atamalik Juvayni wrote of women being traded like livestock, their worth measured in horses or bolts of silk. Some served in households, cooking and cleaning. Others were forced into the tents of soldiers, their bodies made into spoils no different from armor or plundered grain. It is tempting to think of these women as powerless victims, yet even within these confines, some found ways to endure, to influence, to survive. Borte, for example, was more than Genghis's wife. She was his advisor, her counsel respected in tribal councils. Mongol women born free were famously resilient, driving carts, tending flocks, and in some cases even riding into battle alongside men. Their strength was woven into the fabric of nomadic life. But for the captives, survival meant silence, adaptation, or subtle defiance in moments when the guards looked away. The Mongol household was not unique in its cruelty. In China, women's feet were bound to enforce ideals of frailty. In medieval Europe, noble daughters were bartered like coin for alliances. But the Mongol system was stark in its efficiency. A woman could be both a hostage and a bridge, her very body turned into a treaty binding her conquered people to the empire. Each night, the Khan's movements were carefully guarded. He would pass from tent to tent, his steps shadowed by the Kashig, his elite guard of 10,000. To his warriors, this was routine, part of the rhythms of camp life. To the women inside the tents, it was a summons they could neither refuse nor resist. Some were daughters of rulers, bearing the burden of sparing their cities. Others were peasants or slaves, too low in status to even hope for remembrance. Yet all were pieces in the machinery of empire. Imagine yourself among them, taken in 1207, when the walls of Wulahai crumbled under Mongol siege engines. Your silk dress torn, your body trembling as you crouch in a yurt heavy with the scent of wool and burning herbs. Outside, warriors sharpen blades, their voices rising in drunken laughter. Inside, whispers flit among the women like dying embers. A girl no older than 16 stares blankly at the floor, her childhood stolen in a single night. An older woman mutters prayers under her breath, clinging to faith as the only shield left to her. Escape is a fantasy. The steppe stretches endlessly in every direction, patrolled by riders who can track a bird's shadow across the grass. Some women choose silence, folding into themselves until they are little more than ghosts. Others adapt, watching, learning the unspoken rules, calculating how to survive another day. A few, rare and sharp, use what little influence they can muster. An earned glance, a whispered word, to carve out slivers of safety. In such small acts lies the only rebellion possible. This system was deliberate. It was not lust alone that filled the Khan's camp with captives, it was strategy. To take a woman was to take her bloodline, to bind her people through the children she bore. In this, Genghis was ruthlessly pragmatic. He understood that conquest was not just about territory. It was about weaving himself into the lineage of every tribe, every kingdom, until resistance became impossible. And so, night after night, as the steppe winds howled across the camp, the machinery of conquest ground on. The clang of weapons, the laughter of warriors, and behind the canvas walls of yurts, the quiet, unrecorded suffering of women whose names would vanish into silence. For Genghis Khan, domination was never only about land or gold. It was about people, their obedience, their bloodlines, their very futures bent into the shape of his will. His empire was written not just in the ashes of burned cities but in the bodies of women, in the children born from unions that were rarely voluntary, and in the silent erasure of countless names from history. This was a strategy as deliberate as any campaign. To claim a woman was to claim her tribe. A daughter of a Tangut king or a Khwarezmian noble, taken into the Khan's household, tied her people by blood to the Mongol throne. The offspring of these unions became living guarantees of loyalty, or at the very least, reminders of submission. Each child carried not only his lineage but also the story of a people subdued. And the legacy of that strategy is not a legend, it is science. In 2003, a genetic study published in the American Journal of Human Genetics revealed a startling truth. Nearly 8% of men living across the former Mongol Empire, some 16 million individuals, carry a Y chromosome marker traceable to a single common ancestor in the 13th century. Historians and geneticists alike point to Genghis Khan as the source. His bloodline runs through villages in Kazakhstan, across the steppes of Mongolia, through the mountains of Afghanistan, and into the plains of northern China. The conqueror may have died in 1227, but his presence endures in the very DNA of millions alive today. The chronicles record only a fraction of his children. With Borte, his first wife and most trusted partner, he fathered 4 sons, Joki, Shagatai, Ogdi, and Talyui, and at least 5 daughters. Their names appear in the annals because their roles shaped succession, diplomacy, and governance. But beyond them were hundreds, perhaps thousands, of others. Children born of concubines, of captives, of slaves whose names history never bothered to remember. They were scattered across the steppe, woven into conquered peoples, unrecorded yet undeniable. For every named son who sat in council, there were dozens of unnamed half-brothers herding sheep on the plains. For every daughter who married a Mongol prince, there were scores of half-sisters, their lives folded quietly into villages that once trembled at their father's name. The empire's true map was not only drawn in borders but in bloodlines stretching outward like veins across Asia. But what of the women who bore them? Their stories are absent, silenced beneath the weight of conquest. Chroniclers like Juvayni or Rashid al-Din mention them in passing, usually stripped of names, reduced to a daughter of so-and-so, or a woman of great beauty taken in war. They appear as offerings, as prizes, as shadows in the tents of power. Their voices never reach us. And yet their bodies were the foundation upon which Genghis built his legacy. Imagine standing among them, a captive brought from the fallen city of Otrar in 1219, when the Khwarezmian governor defied the Khan and executed his envoys. The Mongols responded with fire and slaughter, and you, one of thousands, were dragged into the steppe. Perhaps you bore a child who would carry the Khan's blood. That child might live to rule, or vanish into anonymity, but either way, you are erased. No chronicle will speak your name. No bard will sing your fate. You are part of the living empire, but you remain invisible. This was the paradox of Genghis Khan's legacy. His empire was pragmatic, merciless, and visionary. He shattered feudal barriers by rewarding merit, created laws that stabilized trade, and opened the Silk Road to an exchange of cultures that reshaped the world. Yet beneath that vision lay the suffering of women who were made into threads in the fabric of his empire. Their endurance, their silence, was as crucial to his success as the horses that carried his armies. Even his personal losses were refracted through this lens. Borte's abduction by the Merkit was not just a wound to his heart, but a formative lesson in how vulnerable alliances could be. He never forgot it. That single event may have driven him to ensure no enemy would ever again use women as leverage against him. Instead, he wielded that power himself, systematically, strategically, relentlessly. The result was an empire written not only in fire and blood, but in lineage. Centuries later, millions of men trace their descent to a man who believed survival meant control, who bound tribes not just by fear of his armies but by the children he scattered across half the world. His name is remembered, etched into history as conqueror and lawgiver. The women who carried his legacy in their wombs, however, remain nameless, their silence echoing louder than any chronicle. And yet, even as Genghis's reach grew, his body aged. The years of ceaseless riding, endless campaigning, and insatiable conquest wore him down. His gaze, once fixed firmly on new horizons, began to narrow. His empire was secure, his bloodline flourishing. But the man himself was walking toward an end that no amount of power could forestall. By the 1220s, the man who had once been Temüjin, the hungry boy abandoned on the steppe, was now an emperor whose name thundered across continents. Yet even Genghis Khan was mortal. Years of ceaseless campaigning weighed on him. He was no longer the unyielding horseman of his youth. His braid had turned gray, his face lined by both sun and war, his body slowed by wounds accumulated over decades. In 1226, while riding in battle against the Tangut, he fell from his horse. Some accounts say the injury never fully healed. By the following year, he was unwell, his body betraying him in ways no enemy ever could. In August 1227, during the siege of the western Xia kingdom, Genghis Khan died. The exact cause remains cloaked in mystery. Some chroniclers whisper of illness, others of complications from his fall, still others of an enemy's strike hidden from official record. Whatever the truth, his death was veiled in secrecy. His body was carried back to Mongolia, guarded by loyal warriors. Legend claims that to preserve the secret of his burial site, as many as 2,000 slaves were slaughtered, their blood silencing the location forever. Even today, the grave of Genghis Khan remains undiscovered, a phantom on the map of history. His empire did not die with him. It passed to his chosen heir, Ogdi, who ruled from 1229 to 1241. But Ogdi and his successors inherited not only the armies and laws of Genghis Khan, they inherited his darker practices as well. Persian chronicler Rashid al-Din wrote of Ogdi's campaign against the Oirat people in 1237, when 4,000 girls were raped by soldiers, their families forced to watch, before the survivors were distributed as slaves. Brutality had become institutional, a weapon of terror and control. And yet, Mongol society was not uniformly cruel. Within their own ranks, Mongol women often held freedoms that shocked outsiders. They could drive wagons, trade in markets, even advise in councils. Adultery, once punishable by death to prevent blood feuds, later carried lesser penalties. Widows could remarry without scandal. Compared to the bound feet of Song women or the cloistered existence of noblewomen in Europe, Mongol women, those born free, stood taller, stronger, more visible. But the women taken in conquest were denied even that modest autonomy. For them, there was no freedom, no dignity. The silence in the chronicles is its own form of violence. The secret history of the Mongols glorifies Genghis Khan's rise but says little of the women consumed by it. Persian and Chinese records speak of captives but rarely name them. The women who bore his countless children are not remembered as individuals, only as vessels. Their names dissolved, their lives reduced to whispers between lines of ink. And yet, their legacy endures in ways that history could not erase. In the DNA of millions, in the genetic footprint that stretches across Asia, the proof of their existence remains. They are there in the shadow of the Khan's empire, invisible but undeniable. They survived, even if only through their children. Imagine one of them now, a woman who once sat in a dark yurt, ropes cutting her wrists, staring into the eyes of the conqueror. Decades have passed. The Khan is gone, his body hidden beneath the earth, his empire divided among his heirs. She is older, her face weathered by years of survival. Perhaps she lives still in the Ordo, now under the watch of a son or grandson of the Khan. Perhaps she was traded, discarded, left to fade in some distant village. She does not appear in any chronicle. No scribe will ever record her story. But she remembers. The ropes may be gone, but the scars remain. This is the true legacy of Genghis Khan. Not only the empires razed, the cities burned, the trade routes opened, but the human cost buried beneath silence. The conqueror's triumphs are etched into history, but the voices of women, the captives, the concubines, the slaves, are lost, their cries carried away on the steppe wind. And if you listen closely, across the centuries, that wind still carries them. In the cold stars above Mongolia, in the endless grasslands that once shook beneath the hooves of his cavalry, you can almost hear the whispers of the forgotten. They endured the storm, they bore its scars, and though history has silenced their names, their shadows remain, etched into time itself. Enjoyed uncovering this hidden past? Like, subscribe, and share where you're watching from. I'd love to know who's walking through history's shadows with me.